Welcome to Sundays with Jane Eyre. This is episode 13. I Longed Only to Dare, covering volume 2, chapter 3, or chapter 18 of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, and I'm in my home today. I was at the Rosenbach for the last couple shows, and now I'm home for a couple, and then I'll be back to the Rosenbach to do these lives. But my guest co-host today is coming from much further away, and that's Dr. Sophie Franklin. Welcome, Sophie.
Hello. Hi, Ed. Good to see you.
I'm so comfortable calling you Sophie. It's one of my daughters is Sophie. So
really
goes
lovely.
by Sophie instead of Sophia. That's kind of
okay.
her. So it's right. Comes easily off my tongue. So I'm happy to have you here. And where are you coming from today?
So I'm coming from Tübingen in Germany. Yeah. So it's the south of Germany. Basically.
That's a Christmas country too, man. They really celebrate Christmas like crazy.
I mean, so because of COVID, the Christmas markets have been cancelled for the second year. Yeah, I missed them last year and this year.
Our former director of the Rosenbach, Derek Dreyer, used to go to Germany every year for Christmas, and that was a big part of it. Is the Christmas markets.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
Alrighty, well, welcome to all of our erudite Brontosaurs and airheads. If you are new to the show, thanks for joining us. I'm not usually dressed in my Father Christmas robe. That'll be for the next two shows. If you're new, just a note on our format. If you're watching live on Zoom, the chat is for you to talk to each other. And if you have a question for us, though, put it in the Q&A on the Zoom interface, and we'll do our best to hit as many of those questions as possible today. We're also streaming live on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, and I know a few of you are, thank you so much for watching there. For that live stream, like the video, subscribe to the Rosenbach channel, and make comments during the show, in the comments after it's over. That's doing those kinds of things really helps us gain greater visibility and helps us grow the audience. Dr. Sophie Franklin, everyone, is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Tübingen. There you go. Did I get it right? See, my Philly accent always comes in. That N and G is hard to do. Tübingen, specializing in the Brontes, violence, 19th century literature and culture, and afterlives. She completed her PhD at Durham University in 2019, where she explored representations of violence in Anne, Charlotte, and Emily Bronte's work. And she is the author of Charlotte Bronte Revisited, A View from the 21st Century, which came out in 2016, was reissued in 2018. And I'm very much looking forward to reading the book, Sophie. As I told you, usually I have books for people on, and I've read them, and we're in like the throes of the show every week, and I just can't get to another book yet, but I can't wait to read it. And we'll hear a little bit about that in just a minute. But first, I wanted to start off by asking your interest in the 19th century and how you got there.
Yeah, I guess it was mainly through the Brontes. I feel like I've come quite late to calling myself a kind of 19th centuryist as a researcher. But yeah, it mainly is through my interest in all three of the Bronte sisters anyway. And I guess the whole Bronte family. There's obviously Branwell and Patrick and several others. So yeah, and I'm particularly Charlotte Bronte and also Jane Eyre. That's my kind of way in. And specifically how violence, as you've mentioned, is represented in language, and in Victorian novels more broadly. So yeah, the Brontes, basically. It's my way.
Is it something that hit you, or like before you started, before you became a scholar, or was this a time period that you particularly like to read about?
Not necessarily, actually. It's interesting because when I was younger, I didn't necessarily, I'd read Victorian novels like Tessa d'Urberville's, obviously Wuthering Heights, couple of Charles Dickens books as well. I think you just kind of naturally, maybe if you're a reader, if you're somebody who reads, they fall into your lap somehow. Yeah. But no, I definitely came to, probably actually it was my master's year, which I also did at Durham, where I gained more of an interest in Victorian literature and also culture more broadly. Because during my undergrad, I didn't really take any modules specifically on Victorian literature. It's really interesting. It just didn't fall in that way. I didn't deliberately choose that. But yeah, in my master's, I specialized in Victorian literature, and I did a module on kind of the idea of thing theory in novels, and Jane Eyre was one of them, actually, North and South as well. And yeah, I just really loved the kind of materiality of the books, and how there are just so many things. They're just populated with things and items and objects, and I thought that was just really magical and wonderful. Yeah,
that'll be interesting today in this chapter, because of what's going on in this chapter now, especially the playing charades and the finding all their props and things like that. So we will definitely hit some of that today. No, I know we talk about it, it just kind of it comes at a certain point, certain areas. I was actually a medievalist in college, and I was only interested in either medieval literature or film, and they were the two things that I was constantly studying and immersing myself in. And I didn't fall into the 19th century. Well, I didn't have the beard then, so why would I?
Okay. And, that's what drew you.
until much later. So do you have a Jane Eyre story then? Is there a first reading of Jane Eyre that you remember?
Yeah, actually, I watched the 2006 adaptation first, which maybe, I don't know, maybe people think that's a bit blasphemous or something, but that was the Ruth Wilson and Toby Stevens.
Yeah, and Toby Stevens, okay.
So that was a series. And I watched that. I must have been about 15 when I watched that. And amazingly, I'd already read Wuthering Heights. So I'd already come to the Brontes more broadly. And that was, I guess, a disappointment more because of what I expected it to be. Obviously, I thought it was going to be more of a love story than it was. Yeah. I mean, I love Wuthering Heights now.
It is a love story. It's just a very twisted one.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah. And I
talk about violence in a text. There you go.
Exactly, so much, and really interestingly represented, or not represented, as the case may be. But yeah, then can we talk about spoilers of Jane Eyre in this?
We have, because there's no way to keep it all secret. Yeah. I just don't like to dwell on them. So yes, definitely. So we mentioned Bertha all along.
Okay, so Bertha, everyone knows about Bertha, yeah. So I hadn't, for some reason, I'm sure I'd heard about the so-called Mad Woman in the Attic phenomenon, but I didn't realize it was connected to Jane Eyre. So when the twist happens, that was really shocking to me when as a 15-year-old. And then my mum gave me the book subsequently to that, and then I just fell in love with it, and definitely read it as a love story then.
Yeah.
Whereas now, it's after many readings, several readings, I have a different relationship. I mean, I still love this book, but we can maybe get into that.
I've told this story on the show probably more than once, but when my two youngest daughters read Jane Eyre, they didn't know the secret, and I was constantly getting updates like, what chapter are you up to, and what just happened, and when they read that chapter, each one of them, I made sure I was in the room with them. Amazing. And got to watch them read it. So, talk about, surveillance and that happens in all these different texts, and Jane watching Rochester and him being aware that she's watching him and all that. I was doing that with my daughters reading this book to see that. And then we talk about it afterwards, which is great. Kristen had a question right away. She wanted to know, explain thing theory. She said she's not heard of it before.
Oh, so yeah, it's I think it was coined by Bill Brown. So I mean, thing theory in general, it's when you really focus in on an object, and you focus in on the histories of a specific thing, an item, and what that history of an item, or how it's described, or what it means in wider culture and wider society, maybe scientifically as well, what that illuminates about the text that you're reading. So there might be a window. I mean, you might think of the beginning of Jane Eyre, she's got the window kind of behind her, and she's reading with the red curtains. So if you're doing a thing theory analysis, then you would really focus on the window and the meaning there, the barrier, and then the red and the curtains. And that's a very simple overview of thing theory.
So no, that entirely works. So your book, Charlotte Bronte Revisited, that you came up with, how did this come about, and talk about Revisited? Why we need 21st century, which I think you do, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, I think I do mention this in the book, actually. I think it was Juliet Barker who who wrote that, with writing biographies or books about the Brontes, you kind of have to justify yourself, or, you think, oh, another one, what this time? But it came about, I actually worked for Saraband, the publisher who did eventually publish it. I worked for them many years ago, and I had just got funding for my PhD, and I'd met up with Sarah, who runs Saraband, and she offered me a bit more editing work. And then I was talking to her about my PhD and saying, oh, well, actually in 2016 it's Charlotte Bronte's bicentenary, so it's a really great, and then of course 2018 Emily Bronte, 2020 Anne Bronte, so it's a great time to be doing Bronte work, Bronte studies. And she was like, oh, we should do a book. And then couple of weeks later, when I went into work, she was like, okay, I want you to pitch an idea for me. And that was, Charlotte Bronte Revisited. And I guess the idea was taking stock of our idea of Charlotte Bronte in the 21st century. So it's not going to give new revelations in terms of I haven't discovered a new kind of letter tucked away somewhere. But I do think it's important to think about, any major cultural icon, there's also now an Emily Bronte revisited, reimagined, and there's also an Anne Bronte reappraised by Del Hay, the Emily Bronte ones by Claire O'Callaghan. So I think just taking stock of where we're at, what they mean to us as a 21st century audience, what we can glean from their work, what we can read in light of our own current experiences. I think there's a movement in scholarship called presentism, and it's kind of reading Victorian or work from the past in light of our current circumstances. And I think Charlotte is ripe for that kind of reading.
Who did the Anne Bronte book? I forgot the
Adele Hay.
Adele Hay, yeah. So if you know Adele Hay or Claire Callahan, I'd love to have them on the show.
I will put you in touch.
I actually even sent an email to Claire, but it might be Christmas break, not looking at emails.
Very busy. End of term. Yeah.
But I would love to have both of them on the show.
Yeah,
actually.
no, they're brilliant.
Bruce Margison has a question. He says, since you're an expert on Charlotte Bronte, and you are now, what sets her writing style apart from her sisters? That's interesting. I never really think about that much.
Very interesting. Yeah, I guess I was going to say her use of the first person is interesting, but then of course Anne Bronte does use that in Agnes Grey, doesn't she? But I would say, I love that question. That's really wonderful. What sets her apart?
Yeah, I'm thinking in specifically style and the kind of the way they use language to convey things. Charlotte to me seems very grounded in characters and their physicality and how that conveys who they are, and she really not only brings it up all the time, but also that takes place throughout the novel. And I wonder if I can't recall Anne being like that, or even Emily. Although it's important what characters look like to them, especially Emily, but it doesn't seem to come out as much.
And I wonder if this I think is maybe something that I would distinguish. Charlotte Bronte is, I think, uniquely interested in the psychology. Again, of course, people watching will be like, oh, so is Anne Bronte. But I do think that if you read Jane Eyre, if you read Villette, you have these, and even Shirley to an extent, that's a bit more, she moves around much more in that. And so it's kind of like the Wuthering Heights in that sense. You can't really pin down people's psyches in the same way. But Jane Eyre and Villette, they are these real deep dives into the characters, or every layer of their consciousness, right? It's really intense, and especially in Villette, if those of people here have read Villette, the psychological richness of that portrayal of Lucy Snow, I think, is unlike what you would read in Agnes Grey, for example, which I love Agnes Grey. It's a very beautiful book, and there is psychology in that. It's a psychological study to an extent, but it doesn't have the same intensity, I think. And that also, I think, is, Charlotte loves her metaphors, and as you say, the physicality. There's a kind of bodiliness to her writing.
Agnes Grey is I always for Austen readers, I always recommend that as the bridge book to the
Right,
Brontes.
interesting.
So
Well, you know what Charlotte Bronte thought of Austen.
I do, yeah, I've been through that, and
Yeah.
but that seems Bronte, Agnes Grey seems more like a Jane Austen novel than a Bronte novel, actually.
Yeah, there's a
I
sort
think
of,
in many ways.
there are elements of softness in that novel, but then you have also, I mean, in Agnes Grey, you know, she kills some birds, some young birds, which is a very violent moment as
That
well.
never would happen in an Austen novel. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you do have all the undercurrents. So yeah, I think with Agnes Grey and Anne Bronte's work, there are undercurrents of these kind of, you know, violences and things going on. But with Charlotte, I do think they're all just out there. I mean, in this chapter, as we'll get to, Jane's really going for it with, I don't know, her attack on Blanche, and yeah.
You had studied Brontes and read a lot, and I'm sure researched so much, you know, to do your book on her. But what was new that hit you doing it, or what was there a thing that you hadn't expected to encounter, or something that you've come up with in writing it?
I mean, I think more in relation to my own relationship to Charlotte Bronte, because I think, I mean, I write about this in the book, that we all have our own versions of all of the Brontes, right? But I mean, and then also we have this kind of pitting the Brontes against each other, and you have to be, or people kind of encourage you to be, are you a Charlotte, or are you an Emily, or are you an Anne, or are you a Jane Eyre person, or a Wuthering Heights person, or a Tennant of Waffle Hall person? So I think it was more, I always struggle, I think, a bit with, and this book helped me give it as an outlet, that this kind of Bronte fan hat that I wear, that I love the Brontes and I'm a big fan of their work. But then as a researcher, yeah, you have to be a bit more, you have to have a distance. And I think that was something I enjoyed. And also how protective I weirdly feel of Charlotte Bronte, which I also kind of felt disappointed in myself about, because I thought, yeah, you should have this distance from this.
Yeah, that's hard
you don't know. And yeah,
it's hard not to have that affection or love for somebody you do. There are plenty of biographers who talk about how they wind up loving their subject regardless of who it is. And hopefully you're not doing the bio on Stalin or Hitler, and and that happens, that it's somebody that you can actually feel.
But I guess that's the thing, with biographies, you have to see their humanity to express who they were as people, and that's what a biography is, isn't it, in many ways? So,
and accept them, accept the things that they've gone through and done, because you're there to tell that story.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, let us we may as well just hit the chapter today running, because this is, well, we're going to hit it running. We're going to talk about last chapter a little bit and just kind of wrap that up again. I felt like there was a very quick wrap up last week in the chapter. I'm on with the Ghoul Guide. Do you know the Ghoul Guides too? The Lauren Nixon and Mary Going, really great work that they do, and they're on the show every month, and it's really good to have them on every month. And but we were talking so much about early in the chapter, when we come towards the end of it there, and just the whole idea that this came up, that which I really like, that Jane is watching Rochester and the company, the whole, and everyone else there the whole time. And then it seems, especially at the end, when he comes up to her in the hallway at the end of that chapter, after she has slipped out of the room, that he is completely aware of Jane in that room, probably all the time, and everything that he's doing, in a sense. And we'll talk about this today, that we got the hint of it, that in a sense he's performing for Jane the whole time. So after she tries to ghost the party and quick get out of there, he catches her in the hall, and and wants her. He's like, why didn't you talk to me? Well, why would she, with the awful Blanche Ingram around? That's going to be really awkward for her. But he is trying to put her in that position where she's more of an equal with him, and she's the one that recognizes that she's not at all. So
interesting that you think that he's trying to put her in a position of equality with him. I don't know. I mean, he knows that she's being undermined by every other person in that room. Yeah, I think it's interesting, but no, totally. He's fully aware. And we can come back to the idea of performance, which obviously in this chapter comes up from the beginning. I mean, they're all performing in some way. And even Jane is, right? She's kind of performing to this kind of very cold, passive person, watchful. And yeah, I think somebody commented saying manipulating, not performing. That was the I love that distinction. Yeah
and as he is, and we'll certainly talk about more of that today and next week too, or 2 weeks when we get to more of that. So are you drinking anything nice today?
Drinking, yeah, I'm having actually some mulled wine, Glühwein, nice. A little mug, just to keep you warm.
Very nice. My wassailing has begun early. It's not early. It's not. My wassailing finally begun. I should have been doing this 2 weeks ago. I was drinking Dickens Punch earlier in the month, and now I made my first batch of Christmas wassail today. Nice. Cider, a little porter in it, and sugar, and lots of spices and apples, and it's so Merry Dickens to everyone.
Yeah. Cheers.
And these really cool glasses, we literally just found these in a box in our basement, and it's got a C, so it's a Christmas.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't intended that way, I don't think. So cool. I'm really happy with these new goblets.
I love that you just found them randomly.
Yeah, we did. Well, my wife was cleaning the basement, and she's like, "Look at this. Where did we get these? They're yours." And I said, "I don't think they were mine. I think they were mine." I think some relative had given them to us, and we're not sure who. So anyway, back to the to the chapter, volume 2, chapter 3, or chapter 18 if you have a continuous chapter edition. I realize that every edition I have is just continuous chapters except for my Oxford World Classics.
Yeah, I mean the Oxford Clarendon, which is based on which is what the OUP one's based on exactly. Yeah, I have the Penguin Classics today.
Yeah, I go through that one too, or at least the notes. But this one had more of my notes in it, so it becomes my main text. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, they're all, and I if I'd realized that all the editions except the one were this continuous chapter. But I do like to keep people aware of the volumes, and I love the idea of original reading practices and the way we approach texts. And I like to look at them as they were originally published. So, and this especially, we've talked about this, that Charlotte Bronte seemed very aware of her 3-volume format, that she ends them at these particularly poignant moments. Right. And that doesn't always happen in triple deckers or any kind of multi-volumes, because the publisher winds up being in charge of when it gets divided. Yeah. We're here in chapter 18. Merry days were these at Thornfield. That sounds like a Christmas chapter, but it's not. Merry days were these at Thornfield Hall, and busy days too. How different from the first 3 months of stillness, monotony, and solitude I had passed beneath its roof. All sad feelings seemed now driven from the house, all gloomy associations forgotten. There was life everywhere, movement all day long. Now, clearly, Jane is still going through this turmoil over, Rochester at times. It's not everything is all, happy days, but that's certainly the mood of the house now, that it's filled with this fashionable set that has come there. But I do find that opening a little surprising, that she's just, everything's so, merry here now, or perhaps she's just saying that with a knowing wink, because Jane becomes increasingly more sarcastic as this novel goes on.
Certainly. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, this seems more the perspective of the guests rather than Jane, right? Because, I mean, you also feel like, of course, she was not particularly happy when Thornfield Hall was quiet, I guess, prior to Rochester. Yeah. Appearing on the scene, and
already thinking, should I leave? Should I?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then obviously, so then I guess this is maybe what that's hearkening back to. All sad feelings seem now driven from the house, and 3 months of stillness, monotony, solitude. So I guess that's what it's in relation to. But I also do agree that I don't think this is necessarily a positive or entirely positive thing for Jane anyway, because I don't think
she makes clear all the time. So, and that's fine. But it is quite a change for the house. And she definitely wants us to be aware of the change made.
Yeah.
There's a rainy day, the weather's not great, and they decide that they will play charades. And I wonder in the Victorian era if it was charades. I don't know. I didn't check the pronunciation from then, but
do I say charades maybe? So I wonder if it's just it's also just a region, like country by country.
Have you always said charades?
I think I think it's charades.
Charades may be an Americanism then. That's maybe
but and I guess it's from the French, isn't it? So maybe it would be, charades.
But in the 19th century, it's a different game than it is now. I don't know if you play it. We actually play this at home still. But now it's all these established things that, you're guessing at it. It's usually just a word or a phrase or a title of something. And you've got the two words and syllables and all kinds of things. And those parts of the activity were not there in the 19th century yet, but also it's different. And what I love about this is we get this glimpse of seeing what this parlor game is like in the 19th century. This happens to Dickens novels too, when we watch them play Blind Man's Bluff and all this stuff, and how these games were a little different in the past. But in the 18th and 19th century, it's very much a team game, and the teams come. There's two teams, and they either act out a scene it's usually they act out a scene, just like happens here, and it's a chosen word. They come up with a word. Here one of the words is bride, and they come up with that. Although how you would get bride, like there's so many different words you can get from their thing.
Yes.
Lucky they got bride. But
very clever.
You come up with a word and you act it out. But it's also, I like the way they do it here, because it's also this kind of tableau vivant thing
of the whole.
Where exactly. a very well-known thing in the 19th century, where people would, especially in these manor houses, but also the middle class, would do this. This is a thing that the middle class likes to participate in as well, where people would pose in a scene with costumes from wherever they could put together, and then pose for a few minutes, just frozen in place, and as a form of entertainment. You would guess what it was. And of course, then photography winds up doing this, and you get this happening in photography as well. But it happened on stage. People would go and pay to see these things. There'd be whole shows you would go, and it would be all tableau vivant, where just one scene after another with actors in full costume and props
with the backgrounds and
and the curtain would go up and they'd just be frozen, and someone would come out and talk about this, and perhaps it was a famous historical scene, somebody discovering somebody on an Arctic expedition, and that's what they're all dressed as, or a battle. And people would just look at them, and the curtain would come down, and they would do a different one. And that seems to be also combined with this game that they're doing here, that they're actually doing it in this style. They're coming up and they're, posing in one, or they're acting a little bit, but it seems very much a pose, especially in the last one, that in the third one that happens. So living picture, that's what tableau vivant, that's the translation of it for anybody. And amateur theatricals too are a very common pastime in the Victorian age, right?
I think it's so interesting here as well that Jane is like, they spoke of playing charades, but in my ignorance I did not understand the term. So she's obviously of course she wouldn't, would she? No. With her upbringing at Lowood, and then even with Aunt Reed, I feel like obviously there was a huge amount of neglect there. She wouldn't necessarily have been involved. She's
excluded. They talk about early on. It's the Christmas season early on when she's a child, and she's excluded from everything. So she doesn't get to see these things, and this is all a new thing for Jane Eyre to participate in.
Very fashionable.
The ladies running up and downstairs, ringing for their maids. Of course, if you're rich, you need your maid to do this, because there's all going to be all kinds of costume changes that you'll have to do. So it's not something they could just do on their own. And then they form teams. And also that just everything that they're able to gather in the house, I find so bad, especially because they're in a wealthy, big manor house. The props and costumes available are, yeah, I want to play in that house,
That would be
So,
fun.
I mean, I've got the Christmas robe, right? And I've got like a Victorian jacket, but
And the
outside of
goblet,
that,
and what
what am I going to use for props?
I mean,
So,
you have some good books there and busts, and I
yeah.
mean, but I think this is Thornfield Hall is next level charades
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, the place to play to do this. Kids
Yeah.
would love this, dress up, doing this.
Oh.
And they come up with teams, and of course, and Rochester starts, and he starts right away. Miss Ingram is mine, of course.
Yeah.
And this will continue through this chapter, as it did, in the last chapter as well, that he is really setting up this idea of them as a couple.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, Jane thinks he's going to. Everyone thinks he's going to marry her.
Yeah.
Why doesn't Mrs. Fairfax think he's going to marry her even before this? When she says that she doesn't think he'll marry her.
That's so interesting. I mean,
because she knows.
Well, okay, so because you've discussed this on the show before, haven't you? But she doesn't know, because Rochester doesn't think that she knows, because he does tell Jane, the only people who I've told are obviously Grace Poole, of course, who has to know, and then the surgeon Carter. But he says Mrs. Fairfax may suspect, but she doesn't have the full facts. Maybe that's later.
Yeah, we'll find out later. But what is interesting is that something that came up about it is that he doesn't have to tell anybody, and she could be anyone. Like, there's no reason for anyone to even Grace Poole, for her to know certainly that he was married to her. She doesn't have to know that. She could just be a mistress, and so.
But then it says, I mean, I agree. Having said that, though, I feel like the gentry and the aristocracy, which he's a member of, or the gentry at least, but they are quite incestuous, not only kind of in their relationships, but also just in their gossip and what they hear. So you think, well, surely they must be aware that he was married, or there would be rumors perhaps. And then, of course, later in the chapter we have, you can't avoid Richard Mason sat in your chair, that's a big giveaway. I guess there is that tension with Rochester, though, between doing terrible things, such as imprisoning your wife, in the attic room, and also kind of trying to do the right thing, so-called. I think he certainly frames his choice as something that he senses as the only option, right? So I feel like he maybe has a warped sense of duty to say, well, this is my wife and I admit this freely. And yet, you're right that he didn't do.
But he's certainly playing along now with everyone else that Blanche and he are a couple, but he still asked Jane to play. Will you play? He asked. I shook my head. He did not insist, which I rather feared he would have done. He allowed me to return quietly to my usual seat. I can't imagine that he thought she would play. But it is interesting that he asks her in this, as he's so aware of everything that he's doing and how he's putting everything together, that having Jane participate could be, would be confrontational to Blanche, I would think, more so than, as well as awkward for Jane if he brought her in, especially if she was on their team. What if he said, "You're the bride,"
and then Blanche would just, I don't know, burn the house down.
Yeah.
Well, but I guess I think, though, the fact that he did not insist, I feel like he's asking her knowing the answer would be no. She's not an exhibitionist. She's introverted, and he obviously does know that. They know each other quite well, I guess, by this point, reasonably well. So I don't know. There's also a kind of undertone of, will you play along with my own charade and my own performance that I'm doing here?
Yeah.
So there's maybe that kind of that slight meaning, perhaps, because I think a lot of what he's doing here, I mean, Miss Ingram is mine. Of course, she is not, and there's no reason for him to say this. So there's always this kind of bluffing going on behind what he's saying.
Part of this for me is that because with Jane, because we get her narration, we see her path to falling in love with him, and we see the initial interest in what she says about that, and then And then she admits, and she fully admits to herself that she does love him in the last chapter, and not that she expects to ever be with him, but that she still loves him anyway. And with him, though, we have to rely on her. First of all, she can't seem to interpret that in him, but also it takes a longer picture to see when he's quite aware of it and when he's being deliberate in trying to bring them together. Or maybe this is just still the stage where he feels that he wants her to be with him and things, but he's not quite. I don't know. It'll depend on what he says later and what we're willing to accept and what he says about it as well. So, Lady Ingram certainly doesn't want Jane to play.
Yes. No, she looks too stupid for any game of the sort.
That seems so mean.
I mean, they are very mean.
They're extraordinarily mean. But that seems even more mean. But that's also because I think stupid has become only such a kind of nasty kind of pejorative. And not that it wasn't in the past to call someone stupid at this time or even before, but it hadn't really, I think, only become that. It could be more playful, or it could be more general, that somebody is stupid of something that they wouldn't necessarily mean an insult, but she's just awful anyway. And it just sounds so mean. Exactly.
It picks up on the physiognomy thread, I guess, that you've already explored in other chapters, but that comes up again here. You know, and Jane obviously reads, you know, you're saying about she surveils everybody and she reads Rochester's countenance and his face. But then in this moment, she's kind of also being read herself and doesn't come off very well. But it is.
And that's the way Lady Ingram reads her, as somebody who would sit around and be quiet and not emote or participate, looks stupid to her.
Yes, exactly.
And Jane, of course, is ignorant of the game. She's admitted that herself, that she really doesn't know. So what would be required of her? Yeah. Exactly. Well, let's look at the first. What's that? I missed that.
They're all very rude. Yeah.
Oh, they're horrible. They're abominable. And let's look at the game, which for me becomes this kind of, I don't know, this like almost meta way of the charades is this meta way of what's been going on anyway, right? Like this is what Jane's been doing. She's been sitting there watching them kind of perform their, lives together, and interact in ways. And now she's doing, and also in a very class conscious way on her part too. That this is her watching the upper class perform to each other.
Literally here,
but they're always literally performing with each other, especially Blanche.
Certainly.
The first one is and they pick bride, and who picked the word bride?
How did we get there? It's interesting.
I imagine Rochester did, because he's really trying to push this envelope. He's really trying to demonstrate to everybody that he's going to marry Blanche Ingram when he knows he's not going to, and he's not interested in her. That's a kind of a spoiler too, because we'll learn in later chapters he's no intention of ever marrying her.
I think we can. I think it's all. Well, I do think it is somewhat clear in some ways, because I think already, you get that sense that Rochester and Jane are being positioned in a kind of love dynamic, at least. And then Blanche is this kind of spanner in the works. And so I do think that already as a reader, you're probably tuning into the fact that, well, I think this might be a bit of a red herring, and Blanche is...
As a reader, I think it should be obvious to this point, although it might not be, but I think it's more likely it is, especially in that there's also a double thing going on, because the reader is also aware that Jane's not aware. Like, I think the reader knows before they do, and that frequently can happen in a courtship or a romance novel.
Exactly. But then you also have the other layer of, you have two Janes, right? You have the Jane experiencing it, and then you have the Jane writing it. And so Jane writing it is already, well, spoiler, Mrs. Rochester, 10 years on, many years on. And then, so you have this kind of, again, this tension between Jane of the past and Jane of the present writing this narrative.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting, she does balance this between not letting on that Jane of that point knew that Blanche and Rochester would not marry, while also that's the power of Charlotte Bronte, isn't it, really? Yeah.
But here they are performing this, pantomime marriage. And Jane sees it easy to recognize the pantomime of marriage. And then the colonel calls out bride, and that's the word that they were acting out. Mm-hmm. And the curtain fell. This is Jane also watching her worst fear, the thing that she is, so upset about, that she'll talk about a little later in this chapter, and we'll hit it then. But of Rochester being married to someone else, just as she has come to love him, and him being, I don't know, this is such a dick move. He's how terrible. Awful. He is awful to do really this in front of her.
No, he is awful. He's awful throughout most of the novel, right? He is, as somebody said, very manipulative, and he has all the power in this. In their whole relationship, right? And so, and in this moment, even more, he knows that Jane is watching him, so everything is for her benefit, actually, I guess, and for others, but mainly her. And yet he still does this, thinking it will elicit jealousy. And then, as she says, it doesn't quite work in that way, but certainly elicits something, anger and kind of rage. But it's, very painful and horrible.
Here's a question for you, though. Is it because he has all the power in this relationship and he exercises that all the time with everybody around him and everything, and Jane's okay with this part of him, and says so many times, and the whole idea of the master in a love relationship with her, and Charlotte Bronte is clearly okay with that kind of relationship being set up that way. Not that she'd be subservient, but that he would have at least class power and perhaps age of advantage over her. So is a 19th century reader going to see him being really awful in this, or see him kind of just doing what he is supposed to be doing?
That's really interesting. Certainly reviewers found their dynamic to be very explicit and kind of erotically explicit. There's I think from an American review wrote that it's a courtship after the manner of kangaroos, and then you also have this whole furious lovemaking aspect as well. So not just I think in this chapter as well you see that, particularly I think Jane talked about her throbbing heart, and it's all very kind of this implicit eroticism in that way. But thinking about, would they have been shocked by Rochester? I think they would have been, well, they were, in the reviews, more shocked by Jane and her interactions with him. And I say that he has all the power, of course. We've already just said he's doing everything for her benefit, even if what he's doing is very manipulative. It's kind of also childish, and she's just sat there like, what are you doing? This is very, on the one hand, it's working because she believes that this pantomime of marriage will become a reality. But then also, you do sense, maybe later in the chapter as well, there's a feeling of, well, who is this target of your so-called affections? And also she can see in Rochester that he's not even impressed by Blanche. So then, there is also, I think, that punctuates his total power in that sense. But certainly reviewers found Jane's behavior, I guess, in relation to Rochester shocking and unique and remarkable.
Every other word, because it is so complex, and this wanted a great choice to read this novel.
Exactly.
This is not a very simplistic view of these two characters, good and bad kind of thing. It is
not at all,
really intertwined. So, all right, everyone, let's see. Let me give a little thank you here for our mid-break and remind everyone that we bring Sundays with Jane Eyre to you for free. So if you'd like to support the Rosenbach through donation, you can do so at our website. And since this novel was published in 1847, we're asking for donations of $18.47 to help support the show. Donations go directly toward keeping this show free and accessible to everyone. And I want to thank everyone who's made donations over the last week. And that would be Elena G. from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Bettina H. from Philadelphia, Mary Jo M. from Kellen, Texas, in honor of Carolyn P., Harvey G. from Delray Beach, Florida, Kathleen S. from Gladwin, PA, Barbara F. from Elkins Park, PA, Barbara G. from Philadelphia, Mary Jo LM from Spring, Texas, Pamela D. from Philly, Christine C. from Glenside, PA. Thank you all for your generous donations. But you could also become a member of the Rosenbach. And let me thank a couple new members. Sue S. from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Thanks, Sue. I know Sue. She takes a lot of courses, too. I'm so happy you renewed your membership, Sue. And Erin P. from Philadelphia. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some of our programs, plus 10% off of any of our reading courses. And I'm seeing if somebody is here. He is, so I'm going to mention him. 50% off Rosenbach programs that are paid programs. We have lots of great programs and courses coming up. And I'll wish a happy birthday to Niels, who is watching us from Denmark today. I saw on Facebook, it's your birthday, Niels. And I know you just renewed your membership not long ago. People renew from all over the world, which is really nice. So thank you all. We have our new winter programs and courses from January to March up online now. We have 3 January courses, which I always recommend because I love the courses that we do. And one of those courses has now become virtual. And that would be the course called Down the Rabbit Hole, Reading Children's Literature with Melissa Jensen. Melissa Jensen is a lecturer from University of Pennsylvania, and she is teaching a course on children's literature from fairy tales and folk tales through Harry Potter, and including especially Lewis Carroll, which is a big part of the collection at the Rosenbach. So that course is now virtual. So if you were looking at that course and saying, I can't come to an in-person course at the Rosenbach because I live somewhere else, well, now you can. So Down the Rabbit Hole is now a virtual course. We also have a poetry workshop. We also have a Jane Austen course, Sense and Sensibility, with Dr. Kathleen Hudson, who has been one of the co-hosts on the show and will be returning as a co-host every month starting in January, which will be really nice. There's also Sundays with Jane Eyre merchandise, mugs, t-shirts, and stickers with our logo. If you get one of those, I'd love for you to post a picture of it with you or with something Jane Eyrean, and post it on social media. Tag the Rosenbach, tag Sundays with Jane Eyre. We have an official bookseller for Sundays with Jane Eyre, a novel idea on Passyunk in Philadelphia, where you can buy editions of Jane Eyre and order other books. You could order Sophie Franklin's book through a novel idea. Just go to their website and put that in and ask them to send it to you. Upcoming co-hosts on the show. We're off next week. I will be wearing my Father Christmas robe, but not doing a show is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a little Christmas break and enjoy Boxing Day on 12/26. And then on January 2nd, we'll return for the next chapter. And Dr. Christine Woody will return. She was on episode 2 and did the first 2 chapters with us. She's a professor at Widener University here near Philadelphia. And Dr. Christine Woody will be returning for our next show on January 2nd. Let's return to the book. Get all my little documents up again. There we go. It's like my makeshift teleprompter here. My documents on the screen. They perform another charade here, and it winds up being the scene between Eliezer and Rebecca from the Bible.
I found this interesting because I feel like the other 2, well, I guess the first charade, and then the tableau vivant, the kind of, the final overall picture, that I guess that's not really a charade, is it? But those 2, I feel like they either give a kind of sense of what's to come in the novel, or also what's going on in that moment in the room. Whereas I don't know, what did you think about this one? Obviously,
the biblical story is that Rebecca is he's not, the Rochester is not going to marry her in this scene,
Yeah.
he is offering her the riches of his master
Right.
to marry, which is
Okay.
which is fascinating, because that's, you know, I mean, Rochester is offering riches to Blanche, but that's exactly what Blanche is
Looking
hoping
for
right now. She wants
yeah,
Rochester to offer his riches to her.
yeah, because I thought it was interesting, because even, I mean, they don't say explicitly, I mean, obviously you know that Rochester is the one with this turban on his head. I mean, we can maybe come back to the Orientalism, which I know you've talked about before.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, because that, I mean, it just comes up all
Costume and
there.
shawls with a turban on his head, his dark eyes and swarthy skin and Paynim features suited the costume exactly. I don't think that's I don't think Paynim is necessarily a pejorative term for someone from that part. I mean, it really comes from pagan. It's usually referred to as Muslims, or at least people from the Middle East. And this is certainly how he's this exotic, dark person, which will come into play very much later when we find out, you know, who Bertha is. But he's like that. And Blanche is also dark. Dark as a Spaniard, she's called by Jane.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much criticism on Jane Eyre and this, how it emphasizes Englishness, and how Jane is very, you know, pale, small English girl, woman. And of course, then you have Blanche with this play on the name, who is dark. I mean, it's kind of lazy, and I mean, also I would say racist, right, to associate skin color with how good a person you are. And the fact, I mean, again, it's this physiognomy thing that you can read it on people's features or on their faces. But then, the fact that Rochester is as well, I think, is interesting. It's obviously read by Jane in a different way than she reads Blanche's face or skin color in that sense. I mean, and the Orientalism, obviously, this is a kind of hangover of Charlotte Bronte's interest in Byron and things like the Giaour and his Oriental tales. She was very invested in Byron.
My favorite Byron portrait is him in the Albanian dress. That's my favorite Byron.
Yeah, massively
Looking
Oriental.
Very exotic,
Yeah. I mean, of course, we'll come to, you know, what they refer to as the Gypsy Women in the chapter as well. And that's another instance, isn't it, of this kind of othering of this people kind of coming into the home. And because I guess Blanche does do that. She kind of comes into Thornfield and disrupts it. And this exoticization, I think it's problematic.
And he's playing a role here, and Jane recognizes that he's playing a role.
Yeah, exactly.
And does this, but you're right too, saying that nobody guesses this.
That's the other thing. I mean, because it is also obscure. I mean, I guess Rebecca goes to the well, and that is referenced in Genesis, I think, and then maybe through that. But they have to then have the picture of the whole to help them along the way.
Oh, and the word, of course, is, because the first one was bride,
right?
And it's well, and then bride well at the end.
Wow.
Duh, Ed. I mean, I literally just realized that.
Oh, sorry. Really? Did you?
Yeah, I just realized that's what's going on here. That's why the tableau of the hall, because they're piecing this word together.
Exactly. And then the final scene is him enchained, and then it's the prison. Exactly. Yeah. No, but it is, to be honest, though, it's interesting with this chapter, because I think initially when we discussed that we would be reading this one together, and I thought, okay, I don't know if a lot happens in this chapter, and then actually it really does set the scene for big climactic moments in the novel. And I think these charades, you can easily overlook them, and they are kind of obscure and strange, but
especially well for this. Like, I mean, I know that, and Jane explains that she's going to the well. They have this great bowl there that is representing that, but actually that's not even mentioned by her. Like, we don't like that it's a well isn't even mentioned. That's in the biblical story.
Exactly.
The camels only were wanting. That's all that she says. She knows the story right away.
Of course she does. Well, very well read.
And then the last scene is Rochester as like the fallen rake, in a
Right.
sense, right? Begrimed face, disordered dress, his coat hanging loose from one arm as if it had been almost torn from his back in a scuffle. The desperate and scowling countenance, the rough bristling hair might well have disguised him. As he moved, a chain clanked. To his wrists were attached fetters. Makes me think of Hogarth. Progress of the Rake.
Yeah.
And which are all, scenes like tableau vivant, painted scenes in the life of a rake. And Rochester's hinted that this was the direction of his life.
Yeah.
That he was gradually becoming more corrupt and has now stopped it and is now on the right path and has, doing the right thing to, be a healthy, good human being. But he was heading down that road that ends, well, for Hogarth, it ends in the madhouse. But the one before is prison, which is Bridewell. As Bridewell wasn't for the insane, right? That was just a prison, right?
I think it's just a prison, yeah. Or maybe I think for specifically women, but I think it was just a prison, not. But
certainly the idea that people who would especially these men, these rake figures who would go and lead dissolute lives, that their days would end, in a kind of moral, financial ruin, often locked up in a prison or a madhouse. And that's what he has told Jane his life was going towards until he decided to fix it, but really until he says, "Now you will redeem me," or what did he say earlier about that she's kind of, he sees her as
his savior,
his savior already.
Which again, quite toxic language going on. But I mean, I also read this scene. I mean, it is, as you say, his one of the many kind of roads he could have gone down, but it's also in a way his current position, right? His vision of his situation, right? He feels enchained or chained to Bertha, I guess, or imprisoned in his own situation. But then, of course, we have Bertha, who is literally imprisoned. So then, and also imprisoned within their marriage, because, of course, she then has no legal rights. She has no ability to remove herself from that situation. And then also, I guess, even the kind of other joke maybe is that like marriage is a prison.
Not that it justifies his behavior, but he does feel that way.
Totally.
He's chained to this mad woman that he can do nothing about. So.
I don't think you can justify his behavior at all, but this is exactly how he portrays himself to Jane anyway, that he is imprisoned. But of course, the real person who is imprisoned is Bertha.
And of course, Jane realizes what's going on here, and Blanche, though, reads it very differently. She sees him as what a gallant gentleman highwayman you would have made.
The ruffian rouge.
She can't quite see that for Rochester, this would be, his debased condition. And she sees him as an English hero of the road, would be the next best thing to an Italian bandit. And that could only be surpassed by a Levantine pirate.
Very romanticized and on the surface, exactly.
And what's his response there? What does he tell her then?
Well, whatever I am, remember you are my wife. We were married an hour since, in the presence of all these witnesses. She giggled and her color rose.
So he's still doing that teasing. But also reminding everybody that, we're the couple here. We're the, and this is not unusual for this class too, that there is a kind of head couple. Now Blanche isn't the head woman, the first woman in, because that would be Lady Ingram because of age and position in society. She's the first woman, in rank, but certainly Blanche outranks her in the kind of social interactions.
The kind of intrigue and who will she marry? That's the big question, isn't it? Of course,
And they are the couple here. So, so a fascinating thing in a sense, and I love how earlier we had 3 watercolors that reveal so much about Jane, and everybody's talked about them, and feel free to chime in on Jane's watercolors. But here we have the 3 charade scenes for Rochester now, perhaps revealing his character. And This doesn't seem at all unlikely that Charlotte Bronte really, is thinking about this kind of pattern, that I've given these three things to reveal her character.
Yes.
Here's three things that performance things in a sense, because painting is also a performance in a way.
Yeah, of your inner world. Certainly. Yeah, this kind of triptych motif. I think that's interesting. I did, because I know that you ask people about the paintings. Yeah, I have thought about it. Yeah, no, I think it's they're very strange, firstly, aren't they? I mean, the iceberg with the big face leaning on it. I mean, that's just so surrealist, actually. It's kind of very modern in that sense. But then my favorite one, I think it's the second one, when there's just this casual dead body in there, and you can kind of see its arm, and she's the bracelets on the arm, and you're like, what is this? What is going on? Yeah, it's very dark. And it's similar, actually. She has that dream later on, which again is very surrealist, with the moon, and then there's this baby, and then obviously she has this premonition about what happens to Thornfield Hall and stuff. So I think Jane's.
But do you find those watercolor paintings to be kind of revealing about Jane's, Jane as a character, Jane's inner life, the way she sees the world?
Yes, because they feel, at least when I read them, very at odds with the kind of person that she projects by writing anyway, because I think, or in her writing, because I think, yes, she's very fiery and passionate and opinionated and everything, but the paintings there's a kind of meticulousness to them in the kind of precision, and at the same time this very absurd strangeness that feels otherworldly. I mean, this taps in, of course, to her kind of being likened to a fairy, and not of this world. So I think it sheds kind of a weird light on her, actually. Yeah. And then they don't really come up again, I feel. I mean, she obviously she draws herself and Blanche. Yeah. But
then she'll paint later. There's a scene later with
but those paintings and those kind of weird and wacky ones, they don't really resurface in the same way. So I wonder if maybe that's also a development of her character anyway. She becomes a bit more, I don't know, staid.
Yeah, and she certainly doesn't do them in any way to demonstrate to people who she is. No,
because they weren't meant to be
private. This is a private, thing for her that becomes, I guess, a performance in a sense only when someone looks at it. But for Rochester, this game, he's not necessarily revealing something about himself. He's still showing this is how I want people to see me. And Jane's not necessarily painting these to say this is who I am, but he's certainly performing these scenes in this game to say this is who I am. And also knowing Jane will probably be the only one to get the reference in the Bridewell.
Yeah, I think so. Who was deemed too stupid to play the game, and of course, we know that she is probably the only one in that room who can really read between the lines of his. I mean, these scenes were clearly created by Rochester. I feel his creative impulse here somehow. Yeah.
Well, he runs the show. Well, with Blanche, he lets her run the show for certain things, but he's clearly in control of her as well. Now the next group comes up, and Jane doesn't even watch them. She doesn't even make a pretense and admits it to us. Like, I no longer waited with interest. My attention was absorbed by the spectators. And of course, it's really just Rochester. And Blanche as well. I see Mr. Rochester turn to Miss Ingram to him. I see her incline her heads towards him till the jetty curls almost touch his shoulder and wave against his cheek. I mean, this is her also torturing herself as she also does. I hear their mutual whisperings. I recall their interchanged glances. And now we really get into this more confessional from her. Why don't you read that I have told you, reader? And I love too that it's reader. Like, she's confessing to us reading
very
the
personalized book. For us, yeah. I have told you, reader, that I had learnt to love Mr. Rochester. I could not unlove him now, merely because I found that he had ceased to notice me. because I might pass hours in his presence and he would never once turn his eyes in my direction, because I saw all his attentions appropriated by a great lady who scorned to touch me with the hem of her robes as she passed, who, if ever her dark and imperious eye fell on me by chance, would withdraw it instantly as from an object too mean to merit observation. I could not unlove him because I felt sure he would soon marry this very lady, because I read daily in her a proud security in his intentions respecting her, because I witnessed hourly in him a style of courtship which, if careless and choosing rather to be sought than to seek, was yet, in its very carelessness, captivating, and in its very pride, irresistible.
I could not unlove him. What do you make of her confession here, and how this is? What's going on in her head?
I do find it kind of baffling, because she's saying I could not unlove him because he is going to marry this other woman. And you think, surely then is that not a reason to start the process of detaching yourself from this person? So I'm not convinced by these so-called arguments. I mean, again, I think I do read this. I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it, to read this in a fresh way where you don't know what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I read this in the voice of the older Jane, and she's trying to kind of, I don't know, explain or justify why she clung on to this hope. You mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah. And first, she wants to, I think, demonstrate her humility for the reader, right? Like that. I understand that, I can't marry him, that he's looking at someone else. And so I'm not saying this in a way, and she'll go into more details later, but that I'm not part of their world. But I can't unlove him, even though I'm not part of his world. But it's the end of that. Witness hourly in him a style of courtship, which, if careless and choosing rather to be sought than to seek, this is a thing that I was struggling with. Was yet in its very carelessness captivating, and in its very pride irresistible. That she recognizes he's being careless and choosing to be sought, to let Blanche seek him rather than to seek her, is captivating, and in its very pride irresistible. Wow. You'd think that would be something that would turn her off, but am I misreading? I don't think I'm misreading that she finds his behavior captivating.
Yeah, I think she just finds him fascinating.
She'll say this in the next paragraph.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so, I mean, obviously, she doesn't think that Blanche is a threat, which again, I mean, this is again why I find her argumentation kind of, there are holes in it, right? Because on the one hand, she's like, well, I'm pretty sure he's going to marry this lady and all this, but then, I mean, she's inferior, which I guess that does follow, but I still think she's trying to convince herself, in a sense, of something that she doesn't necessarily believe in. But I think she just always finds Rochester, whether he's performing to others or on her behalf or just between them, captivating. And
well, first she goes into Blanche. Now she's gonna rip Blanche apart here, which isn't hard.
But so I remember I reread this, and I just think also, aren't you over this, Jane? I mean, I get it, obviously she's trying to capture the moment and her feelings for us as a reader in that time, but she really has carried this grudge. And you think, Blanche really, I mean, okay, yes, was horrible to you, she is inferior to you, but I don't know, I thought
she's not genuine, her mind is poor, her heart is barren, she's not good, she's not original, she did not know the sensations of sympathy and pity, she has a spiteful antipathy towards Adele. I mean, she lays it in.
She really goes there. And sometimes I'm like, are you just protesting a bit too much here, Jane? Maybe.
Well, she finishes this with this interesting, note that, that he other eyes beside mine. Read the end of that there.
Where's that?
Other eyes besides mine watch these manifestations of character. The end of that next paragraph there.
Oh, where is it?
Oh, I'll
Is
just
this
read it.
yes, the future
Yeah.
bridegroom?
It's in the there was nothing to cool or banish love paragraph.
Oh,
It's
sorry, the
end of
next
that.
one. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'd raced ahead. Yeah, there was nothing to cool.
Oh no,
or
and then continue. Read from Other Eyes Beside Mine, and then finish with the next paragraph too. So
okay. So where is that? Why have I lost my place totally?
do you have it? Do you see the paragraph? I was going to marry her for family. I saw he was going to marry her for family.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I see that.
So
Yeah.
a few lines before that, Other Eyes Besides Mine. Sorry, everyone. We don't plan this ahead of time, obviously.
I found it. Other Eyes Besides Mine. Watch these manifestations of character. Watch them closely, keenly, shrewdly. Yes, the future bridegroom, Mr. Rochester himself, exercised over his intended a ceaseless surveillance. And it was from this sagacity, this guardedness of his, this perfect, clear consciousness of his fair one's defects, this obvious absence of passion in his sentiments towards her, that my ever-torturing pain arose. Yeah. And then
so she sees that he's very aware of, she can read it in him that he sees Blanche's defects as well.
Yeah.
And so that's what's really bothering her. And then she goes on.
Yeah, I saw he was going to marry her for family, perhaps political reasons, because her rank and connections suited him. I felt he had not given her his love, and that her qualifications were ill-adapted to win from him that treasure. This was the point. This was where the nerve was touched and teased. This was where the fever was sustained and fed. She could not charm him, as opposed to Jane, who can charm him. Yeah.
Yeah, which I love the fact that she's made this realization about herself that given the chance, I know him well enough that I could please him and I could make him happy, is what she's really saying.
Yeah. So then, but then in a way, I think, she says earlier, well, it's not really jealousy that I feel, but then I think, well, you are jealous of Blanche because you wish that you were in her place. You wish you had the opportunity that she has. Fine, you don't wish you were her, she's inferior to you in so many ways. But there is a jealousy there of her position. Yeah.
And that seems very ordinary to me. I mean, of course you would be jealous.
Yeah.
Because you have him all the time, and now suddenly you realize you don't. And why wouldn't you be jealous?
Exactly.
And also this kind of, it's a good, it's a reminder for us, but because I think this kind of storybook idea of marriage is so ingrained in us now that we just think that is the normal, that you only are supposed to marry someone that you love. And if you don't, it's a complete betrayal of marriage, which is such a new thing.
Yeah, totally. In this period, it was not the case at all. In many ways, it was, marriages, political marriages, familial marriages, marriages of kind of,
and especially in class, especially in this massively. Upper class.
Exactly.
It's not. And marriage has never been only about falling in love with somebody. That's the thing that happens in romances. And I mean, going back in the medieval romance, that's the romance idea that develops into, then through novels, is that you're only supposed to be with the person that you love. But there are so many other considerations, especially in the past, when it was a very rigid institution that you could not get out of.
And I think, this is also partly why I think Jane Eyre as a novel was so radical at the time of publication, because Jane, here she's basically saying, well, actually, if I were rich or if I were of his class, I would be perfectly suited to this man. And there are no other than class and my position as a governess in this household, nothing else would really stand in my way. And that, I think, was a radical proposition in that point,
because they're not Romeo and Juliet. Juliet's not a servant in Romeo's household, right? They are of the same class. So that kind of older story that people would say, like the differences in what would make people not be able to marry each other. Now it's about class. And it is very interesting to see that come into the novel in the 19th century, but it's still,
you have a bit of that in Pamela by Samuel Richardson, which is you have that. Not even just a bit, and that obviously is an intertext of this novel. It's mentioned in it, and there are parallels. I mean, we'll come to the so-called Gypsy Women, and that kind of figure does appear in Pamela as well. But yeah, I think it's more also the interiority of Jane and her argumentation of, I am better than this woman, which you don't really get in Pamela. You don't get Pamela kind of advocating for herself in that way. Yeah.
She has a little more about Blanche here. If she had been a good and noble woman, endowed with force, fervor, kindness, sense, of which she has none, is what she is saying, I should have had one vital struggle with two tigers, jealousy and despair. Like if she was worthy of him, then I would be fine. But as she's not, she, winds up being so upset over having to watch this.
Yeah. That also makes sense when she frames it in this way, that if this had been a woman who was good and noble, kind and everything, then maybe she would think, well, fine, he's met his match and I'm happy to concede, but she's not ready to unlove him for this woman.
And she's still not saying though that that I could make him mine. Like she's just talking about her feeling for him. That's true. She is kind of laying claim to him in a different way. But yes, you're right. She's not saying he's mine, move out the way. This would have been a disaster of a marriage if only because Jane was still, she would have left. So because that's the kind of person she is. If he married somebody else, she would have left. She would have said, I can't be the governess anymore.
Exactly.
So, but she thinks she knows, and what to give him, that she could call love into his stern eyes, softness into his sardonic face. She knows, she thinks she knows how to do that. And
she says that because when she failed, I saw how she might have succeeded. These arrows that continually glanced off from Mr. Rochester's breast and fell harmless at his feet might, I knew, if shot by a surer hand, her hand, have called love into his stern eye.
And then she's back to Rochester, and she even comments that I haven't condemned him. I haven't said anything condemnatory of his project of marrying for interesting connections. She didn't think he'd think about position and education and all, but then she realizes, well, why wouldn't he? I mean, that's the class that he's in, and that's the reality of it. But for me, the very fact that she's thinking of this and saying it out loud, this is, well, why would you even think about that if you don't, if it's not a matter of how could I be there? How could I,
how could I get him?
How could I be the bride? Is what would you lead you to think this? But
then she also does that interesting thing where she kind of says, well, if I were Rochester, or if I were this gentleman and I had this position, then I would only marry for love. And it's interesting that she puts herself,
which would be me.
Yes, exactly. I would choose me if I were him. Exactly. Advocate for yourself.
And then I love this, how she's just admits, I'm growing very lenient, forgetting all his faults. I saw no bad. The sarcasm that had repelled the harshness, they're now condiments in a choice dish. I love that. That it's just the spice of her life. But she also notices that thing that she knows something else is going on, and she can't quite put it together.
So interesting, isn't it? And
the vague something, she says, right?
Yeah, and she says at the end of that paragraph, instead of wishing to shun, I longed. I longed only to dare to define it. And I thought Miss Ingram happy because one day she might look into the abyss at her leisure, explore its secrets and analyze their nature. And you think, oh, okay. I mean, that's very perceptive of her, of course, but I don't know if I want to look into his abyss.
That's what you're looking forward to. But I key on that, as I call the episode, is I longed only to dare, because it's not I dare, it is I long only to dare,
even to be in that position.
I'm not there yet, but this is clearly what she wants to be. She wants to be something who will, be in this tumultuous relationship. Before that, she's talking about that's something which used to make me fear and shrink, as if I had been wandering amongst volcanic looking hills and had suddenly felt the ground quiver and seen it gape. I mean, the That's something I at intervals beheld still and with throbbing heart, but not with palsied nerves. I mean, these are her paintings as well that she's talking about, this kind of feeling in her paintings that she put in there.
These kind of use of nature and kind of extremities, volcanoes and the iceberg. Exactly. That's really fascinating.
But now she is longing to dare, at least, if not quite daring, she's longing to dare.
Yeah.
And I've just, what a great, chapter, in that we get that in just a few paragraphs. There's just so much going on within her and this relationship.
Exactly.
That's happening here. And then and that's it for that. And then that party ends, that evening ends, and then she talks about how everybody needs him around them, or everything's dull. And then he's gone one day to Millcote on business.
Yes.
And then they mentioned the gypsy camp here. I don't know if they were mentioned. I don't think they were mentioned before, but they proposed a walk to see a gypsy camp, which is close to there. And then a carriage approaches, and poor little Adele thinks, oh, voila, Monsieur Rochester qui revient. And it's not, and Miss Ingram gets to be Miss Ingram. How provoking. Tiresome monkey. And then casts an angry glance as if it were my fault, like to Jane as well. So she's not very nice, and we all know it. And Jane can't help but tell us how not nice she is.
You have to know.
And then this stranger comes. His manner's polite, but his accent in speaking struck me as being something unusual, not precisely foreign, but still not altogether English. I love the idea of this, that he doesn't look like a foreigner. He looks just slightly off.
Yes.
And his skin is sallow, which isn't only, it doesn't only mean, yellow or darker. It's sickly is implied in sallow. That's always been the definition of it. And then she sees this unpleasantness. And he's a fine-looking man at first sight, especially. But then she sees something in his face that displeased, or rather failed to please. His features were regular, too relaxed. His eye large and well cut, but the life looking out of it was a tame, vacant life. At least so I thought. And then she specifically talks about physiognomy. Struck me as being at the same time unsettled and inanimate. His eye wandered and had no meaning in its wandering. He repelled me exceedingly. He's got a low, even forehead. Oh, the low forehead. That's just the worst. And no command in that blank brown eye. She's right, of course.
I mean,
the power of believing in physiognomy and then having your characters describe somebody is it's all true. But she sees him as this kind of very unpleasant and repulsive, and yet he's of their class.
And then the ladies, Louisa Ashton and Mary Ingram, they are like a beautiful man, a love of a creature. They adored him, pretty little mouth and nice nose. And again, I think Jane is really setting herself apart as somebody who has the, abilities of physiognomy, right? To read a face, but also, I don't know, there's something about it that he is, they say this kind of meek sheep. And this is kind of what she's aligning the other kind of aristocratic guests with. They're kind of meek, and I don't know, there's a hint of kind of, I think this is what Stevie Davies also writes, degeneracy. She's trying to, again, this is obviously very problematic that she's doing that by aligning Richard Mason in that way with the aristocracy. Of course, they're kind of incestuous and everything.
It's the aristocracy that has been corrupted in a foreign country. They've gone to this other place and now they're corrupt. Very that colonialist, viewpoint where if you spend too long there, you'll go native.
I don't know if you've read Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea, because this scene really reminds me of and how in that book Antoinette, aka Bertha, is described or kind of vilified by their people, I think called, these names. And because even though she's white, they kind of undermine her in that way. Whereas, again, I think Jane uses it. Jane is this pure, right, so-called English girl, and these people come from the West Indies and are no longer pure. And it's
which she discovers he's from there now, some hot country.
Yes, exactly.
The West Indies was his residence, and and then she hears him talking about Mr. Rochester and how he doesn't like the burning heats and the hurricanes. So she's separating, as 3 times now she has separated Rochester from him in the way she describes it and compares him to Rochester. And they're not the same. He's not of the same, but that was, of course, the corruption, for at least for Rochester's in his view, that happened there for him as well. And she realizes that, and she makes it a realization that, I knew he had traveled, but I didn't think that would be the place he had traveled to. So she's also learning something about him.
Yeah, something that surprises her, and also that he's not told her. He's told her previously about, some of his other escapades, isn't he?
And then she's talking about Mason here. Mason is shivering by the fire. And then she says the footman brought the coal in, and going out, stopped near Mr. Eshton's chair and said something to him in a low voice, which I heard only the words "old woman," quite troublesome. At first I thought he was talking about Mr. Mason, and the cheek of the footman to come up to Mr. Eshton like, an old woman here, like the Mason was acting like an old woman. But of course it's not. He's the old woman, the old gypsy woman has come to tell their fortunes.
Right.
And of course, the magistrate says right away, just put her in the stocks. And Lady Ingram is like, oh no, dismiss her by all means. We're not going to allow someone of not just that class, but someone, of another race, this kind of the, the gypsies, the Romani, who were like, they are absolutely, well, in Gothic novels, they're sometimes very mysterious and not necessarily evil, but sometimes they're just not evil. And that's more often than not in culture, is that they're seen as this kind of evil, thieving, murderous people. Certainly no one, certainly not, proper company for these, especially these young unmarried ladies.
And they exist on the kind of periphery of society as well. So they're not controlled, or they don't or they're seen as not following the rules of wider society. And so then they're seen as this threat.
But Blanche will have her way. You can and will, pronounce the haughty voice of Blanche. I must have my will, quick, Sam. And then she won't, when Sam says she won't appear before them, that they have to go in by themselves. I love Lady Ingram says, you see now my queenly Blanche, she encroaches. Be advised, my angel girl. Show her into the library, of course, says.
Cut in the angel girl.
Cut in the angel girl, that sarcastic little comment that and we noticed that in the last chapter. They were in parentheses, where Jane would have these comments in parentheses that were cutting.
She's having fun.
Cease that chatter, blockhead, and do my bidding, she's now saying. So Blanche is just a piece of work. She goes in, she comes out, and Jane's wondering, would she laugh? Would she take it as a joke? But she just walks stiffly to her seat and takes it in silence. They ask her what happened, and she's just like, she's just a gypsy vagabond. My whim is gratified, and now put her in the stocks.
So, okay, went well then, yeah.
But Jane recognizes what's going on. Read that next paragraph there.
Yeah, so Miss Ingram took a book, leant back in her chair, and so declined further conversation. I watched her for nearly half an hour. During all that time, she never turned a page, and her face grew momently darker, more dissatisfied, and more sourly expressive of disappointment. She had obviously not heard anything to her advantage, and it seemed to me, from her prolonged fit of gloom and taciturnity, that she herself, notwithstanding her professed indifference, attached undue importance to whatever relations had been made her. She's not happy.
We learn one of the little things in the next chapter that
yes
was told to her that made her so angry. But we'll talk about that in the next one. Just for now, we know that she is not pleased with her fortune.
No. And I love.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're going to talk about Mary, Amy, and Louise, and
the
I
other
love
girls
that
go in.
Exactly, they go in, and then they're like, "She was great. She knew so much about us," and it's like, oh, clearly Blanche is talking rubbish and has had this revelatory experience probably as well, because the sense is that this woman knows what she's talking about at least. Let's say,
and she knew all about them, knew the things in their houses,
I love
and everything,
that.
and
I know.
And of course, we know why after reading the next chapter that everything, that. But and then it's I found this interesting in that Jane watching Blanche and kind of divines what's going on in her mind, in a sense, just like this old gypsy woman was not really a woman does with her, but really that's the process. It is people who did this read fortunes. They try to read things in you and they get you to tell them things without you realizing you're telling them these kind of leading questions that they ask. But that's really what Jane does with everybody here is reading through their expressions, through who they are, reading their character, cold reading, Adam calls it, that reading, who somebody is and what they will think and what they will do, what they have done, and being right about an awful lot of it if you're very perceptive of picking up these clues.
Exactly.
And,
and I guess that does play into, again, the kind of motif of the charade in general, right? Because, I mean, of course, Blanche is not she is playing a role in this moment. She's trying to pretend to read a book. She's trying to be nonchalant and kind of pass it off as nothing. And then again, Jane is still observing her performance, and doesn't let her off the hook, doesn't let her kind of drop the role, which is, fascinating.
Well, the servant, Sam, comes out and he says, there's one more. He says it just to her too, because nobody's paying attention to her. There's another single young lady. What should I tell her? She's like, and right away. And I think, I don't know, a week or two ago would have been, Jane wouldn't have done this. I will go by all means. I was glad of the unexpected opportunity to gratify my much excited curiosity. And she slips out unobserved by any eye. Well, of course, because they're not. It's like she had to sneak out. Nobody's paying attention to Jane except Rochester, and then she goes. And I like the read that last line.
No, Sam, return to the kitchen. I am not in the least afraid, nor was I, but I was a good deal interested and excited.
She's longing to dare is what I think she's doing.
Okay. Interesting. So you think that maybe she's thinking of scenarios in which this woman is going to give her predictions, or
it could be, but it's also it's adventurous.
Yeah.
And she's had this life where she's always wanted it, but she's always recognized that it's not here. It's somewhere else. And even in Thornfield, when she first came there, she liked it, but she still recognized that adventure is still out there.
Exactly.
And now so she has this opportunity to bring in this into her life, just this little slice of weirdness from somewhere else. And she's okay with bringing that in. I think she would have been a little too shy of that before, a little too reticent before. And now that she's this, we've just seen her kind of opening up more and more to these kinds of situations. At least that's how I've been reading her all along.
Totally. And I think also she sees it as an opportunity to get an insight into what's been said in the room to Blanche and to the other young single women there. And also, I mean, in the next chapter, I guess you see more of this. She also, I think, takes a slightly interrogator, or she kind of does interrogate the woman as well.
She does.
So I think she also delights in that game. She, I think, had that bit at the kind of earlier in the chapter where Rochester says, will you play? And I think Jane has her own kind of little games that she likes to play for herself and her own.
She's not going to play with them yet. She's not in that group, but at least at this point, it's also maybe a little bit of that. Why should they get all the fun?
Yeah,
I deserve it too. Yeah. And she goes off into the room excited, which is really nice. Yeah. So,
and yeah, she's not surprised that she's been the woman, the gypsy woman, seems to just know that she's there. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. She has a sense of, yeah, I am here, and if you're who you say you are, you should. She
is acknowledged. Yeah.
Yes. So, exactly. Which is nice. What she wants. Yeah.
Anything in this chapter I didn't hit that you found interesting? Did we get through it all?
I think. Well, I guess I did love. I mean, we did talk about Richard Mason, but I think the fact that is. I mean, it becomes very crucial, right, in the whole of the novel. And the fact that this is the first moment in which it really is mentioned in the West Indies and Rochester's past in that way. Yeah. I think what I find about this chapter is it sets up so many things so beautifully. And it's things that I hadn't really noticed, even with the charades and with Mason appearing. So I think that is it's such a great chapter for kind of these little tidbits that are going to, these threads that are woven through, and then they're going to be picked up.
I had never noticed the charades game before, and how it ties into things. And this is, I mean, Mason coming in, this is the point where, this is the first real clue as to what's going on. Everything else is just Jane thinking that, Grace Poole's a murderer.
Yes. And, or there's something, there was a weird woman just wandering around the house, aka Grace. And I think somebody mentioned also with the massive basin, what happened to the fish? That's quite funny as well. Like, how did they carry that? I mean, the poor servants would have had to do that, which is just
dump the fish, bring the basin in for the game.
Yeah. What about you? Are there any bits?
No, it was, I love that the charades that I had not really noticed before. But every chapter is like that. I was telling you before the show started today that I'm sometimes I'll hit a chapter and I'll think, oh, there's not much going on here, and then I'll read it and and we still went over today. So it's such a rich novel, and I'm happy to do it slowly like this. So I
think it's such a wonderful way to do it, actually, because I do think you just notice so many small bits. I mean, actually, there was one bit that we didn't. I mean, this was in the second charade, where we did mention how Rochester is described as his dark eyes, swarthy skin, pale in features. And then she goes on to write that he looked the very model of an Eastern emir, an agent or a victim of the bowstring. I don't know. I found that such an interesting way of the agent or victim of the bowstring. I don't know why she didn't pin him down to maybe just the agent. That seems a bit more active and masculine in that way. But then no, she's like, he also could be the victim of the bowstring, which I don't know. I like that punctuation of that. Yeah.
Somebody in the chat just wondering where Rochester got the chains and manacles. So,
actually, that's a good point. Oh, I don't even want to know. It's disturbing.
Maybe they were in use on someone else at some point. So, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, poor Bertha.
Yeah,
really.
Well, I mean, that scene ties in with what's going on actually in the house anyway. So, there is a jailer in the house.
There is, and he's not in jail himself.
All righty. Well, everyone, Bronte Source and Airheads, thank you for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website, and if that's how you're watching, I'm glad you're doing that. And if you're watching live on YouTube, I hope it was enjoyable for you as well. Remember, if you're doing that, please like the videos, subscribe to the Rosenbach, leave comments. That helps us gain greater visibility and gain a greater audience. We also have a Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook group. Look us up on Facebook and join in that conversation. I'm always posting there. Other people are always posting there. It's a lot of fun. Thanks to our chat, Mrs. Fairfax today, Brianna, as usual, for managing the links in the chat. Thanks so much, Brianna. Next week, December 26th, Boxing Day, we will not have a show. I will take the day off to wear my Father Christmas robe and drink more wassail and enjoy the Yule season.
Perfect.
Can't mention it without taking a sip. Our next show will be on January 2 of the new year, and we'll be talking about chapters 4 and 5 of volume 2, or chapters 19 and 20, in which Jane hears her fortune and someone is nearly murdered in the attic at night. Very exciting. Our guest co-host we'll see the return of Dr. Christine Woody, who was on episode 2 in September when we covered the very first 2 chapters of the novel. It'll be great to have her back again. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have, including our gallery gateways and exhibitions, and all the new courses and programs we have coming up from January to March, which are posted there. The Rosenbach's also open to visit if you live in the area. See our website for how we make it safe for you to come see our exhibitions and historic house in person. And please support the Rosenbach, which you can do by donation. We're asking for donations of $18.47 to support this show, but any donation is welcome. And if you're not already a member, I invite you to join. Sophie, this was so great.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me on. I really love this whole concept and I had a really great time.
I'm glad you could come on. I can't wait to get your book and read it. I certainly will do that. I read all the stuff on this and I'm just really bummed that I hadn't gotten to it yet. You were great today. So thank you so much for being on. I'll have you back too if you want. So there's a couple open dates. I won't force you to say yes, but on the air.
Actually, I would be up for it. I really enjoyed this. Yeah, as we said, I think just this way of reading the book, it is a different way of reading it, and I really loved it. Yeah. Excellent.
Well, thank you. And Merry Dickens, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Happy Holidays, yeah.
Yule season, everyone, you and everyone. I hope you all enjoy yourselves. Playing us out over the credits, as always, will be Pleated Gazelle's Secrets. Farewell, readers. May you live entirely for and with what you love best on earth.
Oh, love that.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye, Sophie.
Bye. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.